we got episode 4 of the CBJ Bodybuilding Radio, and we have Mr. Muscles, Dr. Martin Refalo. I pronounce your last name correct?
That's close enough. It's Refalo.
Refalo.
Yeah.
A couple of cool things have happened of recent. WNBF President. I know you've spoken a little bit about it on social media. How did that come about? Are you pretty stoked about it?
Yeah, obviously a very exciting opportunity for me. I've been working with the WNBF since they made an impact here in Australia a few years ago as a judge mostly, and some behind the scenes work over the last year, helping organize shows and whatnot. So it's all built. It's all really kind of been built over the past few years, and this next step really does make sense to me. I don't perceive it to be like a lateral step or anything like that. Like it's the next logical step from where I'm at in my career and the amount of time I've spent around bodybuilding and the passion that I have for the WNBF. So Leah, who announced me as president last week or so, has done such a great job over the past couple of years, really building such a strong foundation. And the goal is to really just build off that. Not planning on reinventing the wheel, just planning on doing the things that we currently do so well, trying to do them even better, and then refining and fine tuning as we go. So super excited for this year because we've locked our shows in. We've got 4 shows happening across Brisbane and Melbourne, and we're only about 11 or so weeks out from the first show of the season. So it's all happening. It's all in the works
getting
right
close,
now.
man.
It's getting closer. And I personally can't wait. I can't wait to be there and to be at the show and to host the show. It's going to be an amazing feeling, I'm sure. And I've got a great team beside me that's going to kind of help bring this dream, if you will, to reality, because it really is a dream when you're kind of planning this potential show and what it's going to look like. It really is a bit of a dream. So I'm looking forward to bringing that to reality, in a few months' time.
Yeah. And I assume that means you can't judge anymore.
Yeah, that's a tricky one.
Yeah.
Basically a no, but there is a bit of fine detail around that. So and as president, I still don't, like, as long as I don't have a conflict on stage, I can still judge, and presidents do that in some of the WNBF affiliates across the globe. Okay. I'm not planning on judging unless I need to in certain circumstances. So we have for pro cards, right? You need to have 7 judges on the judging table, and we only have 6, and we need to do away with pro cards and big open class. Then that might be something I look at doing if needed. So not as much judging though. That's for sure. More things to worry about.
Has anything shocked you, or maybe you didn't expect it to be like it is, with regards to maybe your ideas and how they could actually be implemented practically, or whether they couldn't be?
Yeah, that's a good question. Not yet. There's definitely things that have kind of popped up that maybe are a bit more tedious than I thought they would have been. Nothing that stands out though. I'm currently working on integrating judging software into the federation. So that, for example, is something that I've been able to manage well, and that is going well. And that was initially something that I thought would be maybe a little bit harder, but it's working out well, which is awesome. But nothing that stands out that's shocked me at this point. Anyway, we're still in the early days. It's only been a few weeks.
Yeah, I was going to say I can imagine some things costing maybe a little bit more than what you'd expect, but you have been around maybe long enough to know whether that is going to be the case or not.
Yeah. I think for the most part, I knew what I was in for, right?
Okay.
Again, because I've been around for a while. So yeah, no massive surprises yet, but I'm sure something will pop up at some point.
Yeah. And another thing I really love that you guys do, just not including yourself, but a part of
Mm,
JPS is things like your physique seminar. You got Mike down, Dr. Mike down
mm,
earlier this year. Bringing back that in-person stuff that isn't really as common anymore.
yeah,
I wasn't really around in the fitness scene when, in-person seminars would pop up multiple times throughout the year and
yeah,
people would
you
travel
missed
over.
out, man. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Uh, Mountain
Mm,
Dog, John Meadows
mm.
he came down to the gym I train at now and did a seminar
Wow.
there with
Yeah.
Eugene. That was maybe 2020, 2019, so just
Okay.
before
Yeah.
things started to get a little bit crazy. But I
Yeah.
really love this in-person stuff that you guys do. Is there anything coming up this year that maybe I should be keeping an eye out for?
Yeah. Man, you made such a good point though. It's not only is it not more common, it's just people just have they gravitate towards just wanting things to be done online.
Mm,
At least that's what we found. And so I think that's the issue, and then that causes things to become more common, less common. Because why would you try and do face-to-face things when everyone wants to do things online, right? So even for us, the frequency at which we do in-person seminars and events has decreased. Prior to COVID, we were running the Ultimate Evidence-Based Conference.
hmm
I'm not sure if you remember, but we have people like Brett Contreras, Leighton Norton, I mean, Alan Aragon, Jeff Nippert came down with me. We had some massive names that kind of came down for these events, but yeah, it seems that the desire and the appetite for that has shifted over time. I guess that's a separate discussion. But for this year, we are running the Ultimate Physique Conference again.
Nice.
So that will be taking place in June, on June 6th and 7th. And we've got a nice lineup that will be released very soon. So it might be worth keeping an eye out for that.
Cool.
Um, Off the top of my head, that's the only big in-person event that we have coming up. I mean, it would be awesome to do more, and we want to do more. It's just a matter of ensuring that it's feasible and that people are gonna want to come and buy
Yeah.
tickets and
Yeah.
instead of just watch it online. That's right, because some people just rather watch online.
Yeah. And I mean, I've coached on the gym floor and now I'm predominantly doing online coaching. And I can tell anyone for a fact that if I get someone in front of me in person, I can make a change within 5 seconds. Whereas
Mm,
it might take a couple of days depending on how quick and how responsive the
yeah,
individual is and maybe
yeah.
how easily they take on concepts. So I think if anyone is wanting to learn as much as possible, as fast as possible, in-person stuff is, I think, really, really powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. Online coaching can work well, but I think and just online learning itself can work well. But there's something about in-person learning and in-person interaction that you just can't really replicate
Yeah.
online. And I only wish that more people could come to realize that.
Hmm. Well, who knows? Maybe there's going to be a slight uh, sort of equilibrium achieved with regards to like the pendulum
Mm,
of
yeah,
online
yeah,
versus in-person stuff. Like
yeah.
sometimes it needs to swing
Hmm.
all the other way for it then to come back to the middle. So we'll find
True,
out what happens.
true.
Uh, Now, um, did a little bit of background research. I know you've done a bit of your research on protein intakes, but probably more around proximity to failure, RIR training. Would you say that's an
Yep,
accurate? Cool.
yep, yep.
I really want to dig into one question I've got that's been on my mind for a while, but specifically, if you were to choose 1 rep in reserve or 0 reps in reserve for a practical application, what would you lean more to and why?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Um, yeah, it's a funny one because I recently watched a reel that was using one like a graphic from one of my papers to highlight why going to failure is a physiologically inferior rep. That's how it was described, and the the message being conveyed was that you should always stop at one RIR all the time because of these fatiguing mechanisms that basically mean your attempt at reaching failure is physiologically inferior. That was the language that was being used. I don't think it was a correct kind of interpretation of the graphic that I had displayed in my paper, and it got me to realize that there does seem to be this discussion online, maybe on TikTok. I'm not on TikTok, so I don't know. And even my conversations with Jeff Nippard, yeah, made me realize that there is this conversation happening online about whether we should be going to failure or just topping out one RIR. You know, that's such a specific, just blanket number. And
Mm.
I wasn't really aware of that. I was under the impression that most of the discussion revolves around people just thinking that we must always train to failure all the time. But there's a subset of people that also think you should only do a one RIR because doing that next rep is actually a problem. And I am not sure I agree with either of those camps. I don't really think um, either of them kind of makes sense in isolation. I think, yeah, reaching failure and stopping at a certain number of reps in reserve, I think they're ideas and strategies that should sit on the same side of the fence as opposed to opposite side of the fence. Because in reality, when we're giving practical recommendations, personally, I don't like giving blanket recommendations where it's like, no, this is what you're going to do, and you're going to do the same, and we're all going to do the same thing. If I'm going to give a recommendation that is going to be generalized across a demographic of people, it needs to be a little more flexible, I think.
Mm.
I think that's the only way it can really make sense and that it can really apply well across numerous people is if there's flexibility and if we're thinking about probability and ranges as opposed to black and white. I think we need grey area when we're giving a practical recommendation to an extent, because then you give too much grey area and people get lost. It's like there's
Yeah.
always double-edged sword, but everything really is. So I think, long story short, to kind of take a few steps back and get at your specific question, I don't know if I want to choose one over the other because I really don't think it's a false dichotomy in the sense that it must be either or. Um, I think if I was to give a practical recommendation to the wider population of people who train and who want to build muscle, it would be try and terminate most of your sets, possibly all of your sets, within 2 reps shy from failure. So from that failure point to 2 reps in reserve, you've got that range, and that's where you want all your sets. If you're trying to maximize hypertrophy, you want all your sets to be ending in that range. And
Mm.
where your sets sit on that range, well, that's going to depend on who you are, how well trained you are, and what exercise you're doing, whether it's your last set or your first set. Some people can and should probably bias most of their sets towards the failure point, and others should be on the other side of that range, right? There's definitely context dependent reasons for certain individuals to work their way across that range, right, or bias one end of the range over another. And that to me, that's the practical recommendation that I have managed to put together based on my understanding of the literature, which involves some of my research and the wider research as a whole. So that's my roundabout answer to your question, even though I didn't really answer it directly.
It's funny because a lot of times when these questions are posed on a video on social media that there's supposedly one and only one answer, but a lot of times we need to think more broadly and apply nuance where necessary, and generally nuance is needed to be applied. But I wanted to ask, with you still do some coaching, correct? I know you
For
still
sure.
coach Sam. Yeah,
Yep.
awesome.
Yep.
And with someone like Sam, and maybe I could put myself in that camp when, in essence, you have everything being covered in terms of your variables. Or for
Mm-hmm.
me, I at least like to think I do. Do
Mm-hmm.
you like to standardize your intensity? So whether you're, between 0 to 1 RIR, or like you keep everything at 2 RIR for a mesocycle, or in general. I mean, for me personally, I like to think I'm always within 0 to 1 reps in reserve.
Mm-hmm.
If
Mm-hmm.
there's a rep where I'm like, 30% likelihood I'm going to get this, I might choose not to take it.
Uh-huh.
But then there's other times where I give it a go. I see
Yeah.
if it's there truly, and I will, try and dig at myself out of the hole as
Uh-huh.
much as possible.
Yeah.
Because then if potentially that's standardized, you might be able to argue it then comes down to exercise selection, total sets, frequency, and maybe something else if I missed it, in terms of how much work you're doing to maximize the result of hypertrophy. What would you tell someone like myself or Sam if you were the head of programming in that sense?
Yeah. I think it's that one. You brought up a good point about how you have all these other variables dialed in. And I think that's such an important part of the equation, because if you can dial those variables in, whether that's your nutrition, your sleep, your stress management, recovery, etc. Well, if you think about that range that I mentioned earlier, that strike zone, that's what I call it. You can spend more time towards that failure end. You can, and like I said before, you probably should, because you're capable of facilitating that training stimulus, right? Providing that you aren't getting injured, that you're tolerating any pains well and navigating pains, etc. Like, that's just a separate discussion. But providing you're capable of tolerating the training, and you are taking care of the variables that are going to allow you to adapt to that training stimulus, I think you can and you should spend more time there. So for someone like Sam, the instruction for him is to push each of your sets as basically as hard as you can, right? So he's also at that 0 to 1 RIR, I guess, range. It's just a narrower range on most of his exercises, right? And there's obviously a couple there where it might be a bit further away if they're highly fatiguing, for doing something like a stiff leg deadlift or whatever it might be. And I think as you become more well trained, you can get pretty good at knowing which reps you should take and which you shouldn't when you're so close to that failure point, right? And I think Sam is really good at knowing which ones he should and he shouldn't take, and sometimes he will push to see if that extra rep is there and fail, and that's fine. I don't think that's physiologically inferior.
And he
At
might be
least,
wrong sometimes, and
and he
that's
might be
needed
wrong.
to
True,
buffer that skill as well, like
true. So
continual.
I agree, and I think that should be welcomed, right? I think we should welcome that. And it's if you're giving that instruction within a program that has been constructed well, then it's not an issue. Like, his volume is prescribed to him. It's not your volume, it's his volume. And I've been coaching him for 4 years, so I know what he should be doing, how much he can handle, what he responds to, etc. It's like the exercise selection. It's the same. The exercise order, right? Or the volume of each individual exercise. Like, all these different variables are interacting. I think if you can nail that within a program, and you've got this individual who is taking care of all these external variables, then for sure, we should look at that strike zone and we should bias RIRs closer to that failure point, and then obviously reach failure on numerous sets throughout a program, throughout a week, as well. And that goes within the context of someone looking to maximize
Mm.
muscle hypertrophy. Right? There's a difference between wanting to build muscle and wanting to do it well and wanting to maximize it. Although we're
Yeah.
not really ever going to know if we're maximizing it, and this is like the optimal fallacy. It's like we don't know if we're at optimal. We don't know if optimal changes over time. It probably does, and it probably looks different for me and for you. But that doesn't mean we can't push towards it, and we can't attempt to optimize. Um, but optimizing obviously requires just that little bit more. I I think based on my current understanding of how things work. But that doesn't mean that someone who just wants to build muscle, who's not looking to compete, can't have a slightly broader range of which they terminate their sets in, especially if they're not taking care of the other fine variables that can play such a large role in adaptation as well.
Absolutely. And it's funny you mentioned that sort of optimal fallacy. Uh, it's sort of the question I've been asking myself is like, how much should I and can I do to be in a position where I'm putting on as much tissue as
Mm,
possible? And
hmm
I'd like to ask you, what are the things you look at,
mm,
things like the logbook, that you bring together to come to a conclusion, okay, this person is probably in a green zone of
mm,
covering well, putting on good amounts of muscle. What are the
mm.
things you like to do from a practical sense?
Yeah, I like that question because the importance of diagnosing progress is so high. And I think this is where a lot of people go wrong is they struggle to diagnose their progress, to measure it, because measuring muscle growth is hard, and
Mm,
you can't just leave it up to a few poses in the mirror that you do every morning. It's like you're just not going to see the changes day to day. You're probably not even going to see them week to week.
yeah.
So there needs to be a reliable means of diagnosing progress. And what happens if you can't do that? What happens if you can't measure progress is, well, you're looking at the mirror, it's been a few weeks, new program isn't working, or at least you perceive it to not be working because you're not seeing changes. Well, what are you going to do? Well, you're just going to follow the next TikTok trend. You're going to change program, you're going to change coach, you're going to do this, you can do that. And we see this happen a lot. I mean, if you spend enough time around the industry, you see people chop and change, doing different things and struggling to commit to a program for numerous months and actually see if it's going to work.
Mm,
Uh, so I think to answer that question directly, like the key thing that I'm looking at is, and there's a few things, but the key one, the most, I guess, reliable one that you can easily track is, can I observe progressive overload in my client over numerous weeks and months? And what the definition that I'm using here to kind of describe progressive overload is what I call like the post hoc definition, which is progressive overload as a result of the adaptation, right? So it's not
mm,
something that we're going into the gym and forcing. It's we've done a training session and we've induced a training stimulus. We have adapted to that stimulus. We are now stronger and bigger, and so we walk into the gym the week after and we're capable of lifting more, whether that's more weight or more reps or with better technique, whatever it might be. Usually just weight and reps. They're the big rocks. And if I can, as a coach, naturally observe that across weeks and months, and I'm not having to force my client to add an extra rep or add more load, and they're just naturally able to do that on multiple exercises for the target muscle groups that we're trying to build across months, right? Months and months of time, which means we need to stick to the same program. If I'm seeing that, then for me, that's like one of the most important things I can track, because
yeah.
I can't put my client in an MRI. I can't do an ultrasound. Well, I can, but I can't. I don't want to. I don't want to do an ultrasound.
Just a little bit
I
inconvenient.
just a little bit. There's things that we can't do. There's things that we can do but that aren't super accurate, like a DEXA scan. I can tell you to go get a DEXA scan, and do I really need to do that? It's to tell me what I
Yeah.
want it to tell me. I can do circumference measures, and I think circumference measures are fine, but like we know that there's compounding factors there as well. So what I look at, which I think is a good starting point for most people, is progressive overload. Like, are you seeing progressive overload? Are you seeing volume load increasing over time for most of the exercises you're doing, especially for the target muscles that you're looking to grow? And if you combine that with improved visual photos, right, and body weight, slowly trending up, that's awesome. That's a kind of a bit of a trifecta for progress that's going to tell you whether or not what you're doing is working, right? And if it's working, then you keep doing it, and you don't really need to worry too much about changing it until you start to see things stall, right? Because again, if we bring the optimal fallacy back into the discussion here, it's like, who knows, man? If you added an extra set to each of your exercises, like maybe that's all you need to get to your absolute maximum point, but you're never going to know. Maybe you're currently doing too much and you need to take one set off. Like, who knows? Maybe there's some physiological things happening within you that are just at this point just proving to be like negative and
Mm.
hampering your muscle growth. Like, you don't know that. I mean, like, the people come up with these theoretical reasons for things happening all the time, and theoretical mechanisms are taking place. It's just we just don't know. We just don't know how they function, how accurate we can kind of measure them, all these sorts of things. So it's like, if you're seeing progress and you're looking bigger and your volume load's increasing, it's a thumbs up. And usually for me as a coach, I try to stand my ground. I try and stick to my guns and only make changes when I really think necessary, right?
Yep.
And if clients getting closer to a competition prep, for example, I know they're going to be in a deficit soon. They're responding really well, but I think their arms need to be a bit bigger. Okay, let's change exercise order. Let's put your arm work up closer to the beginning of your program. Let's maybe drive a little more volume to those areas, and let's see how that goes for the next 8 weeks. Like, I'm happy to make changes, obviously, but I think the key here is finding a program that is allowing your client or you to progressively overload and just milking it, trying to get as much out of it as possible over time.
Absolutely. I love that. I mean, I did my last mesocycle probably would have been like 16 or 18 weeks. And really, the only thing I changed of
Wow.
late is I'm doing a 2-on-1 off. I changed 3
Okay.
exercises. So all the other exercises are things that I am accustomed to neurologically
Hmm.
and the skill. And then maybe move rep ranges around a little bit.
Okay.
So I think that speaks volumes
I like
about
that.
you have to sort of stick to things for a fair chunk of time. I think people underestimate how long it takes to learn the skill of a movement if it's completely new,
Hmm. Hmm.
and then putting into practice and keeping your head down when maybe enjoyment isn't quite there. But I think if someone's like myself, where progress is where I get enjoyment out of the gym,
Right.
one
Right.
of the realms, I think that's maybe less of a concern. Now, I
Yeah.
want to ask, so obviously we need to see progressive overload, and I think there's an individuality to it in terms of like
Hmm.
how much does someone
Hmm.
progress weekly, or
Hmm.
does someone progress every 2 to 3 weeks? And maybe one of those variables would be training age and skill. Is there a sweet spot? Is there a range you're sort of like, okay, this is probably pretty good, or all right, I need to pull out a set, or maybe consider adding an extra set in?
Mm. Mm. Yeah, that's a trickier one to answer, because you're right in saying that people will progress at different rates. And yeah, I guess one of the more explicit, factors that will influence that is training age, right? Someone more advanced may not see progressive overload week to week. It might be on a fortnightly basis, maybe slightly longer than that. It can depend on the exercise, that's for sure.
Mm.
And I think the key point to understand here is is just because you don't see progressive overload from one week to the next, it doesn't actually mean you haven't done enough to grow some muscle, right, from that exercise. So let's if you've got a full program of exercises, um, some of them are going to progressively overload week to week. Even if you're very advanced, you're going to be able to observe that. Others going to be a bit slower. Fine. Now on those slower ones, um, a lack of progression, a lack of performance improvement from one week to the next can still mean that you're inducing a stimulus that is beyond the threshold required for adaptation to occur. Okay, so for muscle tissue to grow, right, there is a certain kind of threshold level that the stimulus you induce has to exceed. Okay, so if we just don't train, and we live our lives on planet Earth, we are still experiencing tension because we are having to overcome the forces of gravity. Our muscles are still doing some work to keep us upright and to allow us to move and function. That amount of tension is not going to exceed the threshold required for adaptation, right? So that tension stimulus is going to allow us to basically maintain our muscle mass at adulthood, during adulthood. And if we have good training experience and we actually built some muscle and we stop training, we will lose muscle. And then we'll eventually just maintain um, whatever we get down to, right? So training allows us to exceed that threshold required for adaptation. And doing 10 reps a day with 100 kilos and 10 reps next week with 100 kilos, right? If it was like overloading in the first place and it allowed you to exceed that threshold, right? It's gonna allow you to do the same the week after, especially if you've got other exercises as well that are progressively overloaded. Because more often than not, some are gonna move forward, others might lag behind, but we want to think about the program as a whole, right? And we're often doing more than one exercise for a muscle group. So
Yeah.
I think that's a little bit of a misconception where people think if their reps or their load aren't going up every single week, that they haven't induced the stimulus potent enough to build muscle. But I don't think that's the case. I think that growth signal required from a training session, it's a range, right? There's a theoretical top end where you are optimizing, like somewhere there, but we don't really know how to reach it. And there is a bottom end too. And so I don't think as coaches we should make these kind of fast decisions about reducing sets or adding sets just because we see like a bit of a stall in progressive overload. Sometimes it might take me a few weeks to make a decision. Like if I've seen a stall now for 3 or 4 weeks, okay, my alarm bells are going to go off and I'm going to make a bit of a change. But I try not to do that from week to week.
Yeah.
And I think the objective stuff and looking at the progressive overload, that's important, but also having these discussions with clients and trying to get qualitative feedback, I think is important too. If clients are seemingly handling sessions really well, tolerating the training really well, feeling good, you're getting enough food in, all that sort of stuff, I'm absolutely fine with like just adding some additional sets in for target muscles that we want to grow. I mean, I'm of the opinion that um, a volume is conducive to hypertrophy. It's like, yes, the more volume you add in, the more you grow with diminishing returns. I understand that there's probably a pretty strong diminishing return kind of component to adding volume in, but I'm happy to experiment. I'm definitely open to experimenting with additional volume here and there. I try and keep it up to sleep though, because I think the most important factors to nail, your exercise execution, your proximity to failure, because that's your volume quality. And I think if
Yeah.
you can get your volume quality right, most people can get a lot more out of like less, right? Most people are doing a lot of volume, but not doing it in the right ways. And it seems like the earlier the like if you're thinking about like 20 sets of training volume across a week, the first 5 to 10 of those sets probably getting you a big chunk of your gains, and then we really start to see diminishing returns from there. So for a lot of people who are doing like 20 sets of volume a week for a muscle group but not executing really well, I'm a fan of just cutting that on like half and just focusing on doing 5 to 10 sets for a muscle group, but really getting to the point where we nail those 5 to 10 sets, and then we can have a discussion about adding more if I think we need. So that's kind of my just general thoughts on that.
Absolutely. I think that's really well put. I definitely noticed, even coming out of prep, my ability to execute has just rapidly increased. And,
Mm. Hmm.
in a position where maybe I'm doing a little bit less than I was doing in
Okay.
prep, uh, and now playing around with a higher frequency, doing an upper and a lower, and then a rest, and then repeating, uh, I'm obviously throwing a little bit more in my total recoverable bucket with
Mm.
regards like putting more leg work in, like, you know,
Seems like it.
two
Yeah. Yeah.
sets, yeah, 2 sets of leg press versus 2 sets of a bicep curl, two completely different
Hmm.
things in
Hmm.
terms of like how that impacts you across a week.
Hmm. Hmm.
But yeah, it was really cool to hear just the things that you look for,
Hmm.
especially with a coaching background and some of the research you've done. Uh, but I think a big one, even going back to the intensity thing, is some of the research you've done too, is people's perception
Hmm.
of
Hmm.
RIR and that
Hmm.
playing into one of those variables. If you are training 1 to 2 RIR, is it
Yeah.
actually one
Mm.
to two RIR? And
Mm.
just like we spoke about with Sam or
Hmm.
any other individual,
Hmm.
potentially going to a point where they can't complete the rep by themselves on occasion isn't
Yeah.
a bad thing, as we're just
Yeah.
honing that sword, that skill of training intensity and knowing where to land.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. I I'm pretty like confident in people's abilities to gauge RIR as long as they're
Okay.
well trained. Um,
Yeah.
Obviously, like I'd be pretty open to putting a decent amount of money down on you, like being able to hit like a 1 to 2 RIR on like a bench press or a
Mm.
leg press. Like I'm pretty confident that if I told you to stop within 2 reps right from failure, so that strike zone that I mentioned earlier, like you're gonna do a set and you're gonna be somewhere there, right?
Yeah.
And I say the same for myself on most exercises, at least when I've got a good training routine going. And yeah, same goes for the clients that I train that I I use RIR with and that are actually trying to maximize muscle growth. Because for a lot of the population that we might work with as coaches, is at least if you're in like a personal training studio or a commercial gym, it's like people just want to build muscle and be stronger, and you don't have to be as pedantic about your RIR with those types of people. Like, yeah, we still want to push people harder because most people are going to be working, um aren't going to be pushing themselves as hard as they think they are, right?
Yeah.
So we should always be trying to push more, but we just don't have to be too pedantic about it. So I don't really care if someone stops at a 3 RIR when I told them it was a 2, if they're just a general population client, right? It's still good training stimulus. We'll try and do better next week.
Mm.
If,
Mm.
however, we are working with a bodybuilder and someone who is trying to maximize growth, then yes, that question will always arise. It's like if I tell you to stop your sets at 1 to 2 RIR, how do I know you're actually there? Well, firstly, like I mentioned, I'm going to be confident in my athletes getting there, right? If I'm prescribing that sort of number, and there's still going to be some variability around it, and I think that's the beauty in like RIR, I think, is the subjectiveness. People see that as like a bug. I don't think just because something is subjective, it means it's a flaw. I think that allows you to auto regulate your training. It allows you to learn. Allows you to get better. It's like just because you miss one set today and it's just a little bit off, it wasn't as hard as it really should have been. Well, fine. Let's just make sure we get it on the next set or get it next week. Um, I guess to prevent this issue from happening, I like to allocate that strike zone range. So, like I said, I'm telling my clients keep 0 to 2 reps in reserve. Make sure you are in that range when you finish your sets. I'm increasing the chances of them being there because really all they have to do to get there is ensure their rep speed is slowing off to the point where they're not even sure if they can do the next rep. Like, when you're
mm,
finishing your sets, you're probably like, I actually don't know if I can do the next one. I might, maybe I could get it, but I'm really not sure if I could get it. And if you're thinking like that, you're probably within that 0 to RIR range. Now, of course, if you had Brandon Kempter, standing beside you yelling in your ear, well, all of a sudden your arousal levels increase and you might be able to do another rep. But you don't always have him by your side. So that doesn't even matter. It's like you can only do what you can do with the amount of arousal you have going into a session, right? Does that make sense? Like, your
yeah,
ability to push can always be amplified, but at the end of the day, you have to work with what you've got in the training session that you're doing.
mm,
So yeah, from the research that I've conducted, it seems that when you test people who are trained and you tell them to predict a RIR, they can be quite accurate. At least if they have a long training experience and if they have used RIR or RPE in the past, they can be quite accurate. But yeah, that always leaves the door open for some uncertainty, and I think that is an issue to an extent, especially with people who want to maximize muscle growth, right? But just aren't really there yet with their ability to push, right? Like, so some are, you are, some of my clients are, but some aren't. And those are the ones that, for example, on the last set of every exercise, I might say, hey, I want you to go to all out failure. Or on these 2 sets, on this exercise, you're going to push to failure on those 2 sets. Those are prescriptions that I definitely give. I give all the time. But just because you prescribe like 2 sets to failure on one exercise doesn't mean the whole program has to look like that. There's room to move. There's flexibility
yeah,
around the prescriptions, which I think is, again, that's the beauty of using RIR, and it's the beauty of being a coach. It's like you have options and you need to use your tools wisely for your clients. So I think it's those clients who do want to maximize growth but just aren't really there yet with their intensity, that okay, those are the ones that we need to push to failure more often, right? We have to prescribe sets to failure. They need a training partner. They need to record their footage and watch over it. But yeah, someone like Sam, someone like yourself, I've watched your training videos. It's like, if I tell you to stop at a certain RIR, I'm going to be pretty confident that you're gonna get there.
mm. And this is where like science and art crosses over
Yeah.
with coaching, where maybe that individual isn't quite there with that skill, so prescribing a set to nothing in the tank
Mm,
is potentially a
mm.
good thing long term. But
Yeah,
when
but
you,
it just quickly as well, just to butt in,
yeah,
just because you tell someone to push a set to failure, it doesn't mean they're actually going to get there. It's kind of like
yeah,
telling someone to eat less. It's like, well, it's kind of open ended. Like, even telling someone to push to failure is open ended because most some people will be able to do it and get to the point where they involuntarily terminate their sets, but others just won't. Like, if you had 1,000 people and you said you all push yourselves to failure on this set, like, how many are actually going to be able to push there on their own? So it's a matter of prescribing that and then providing the parameters and the instructions for them to actually get
mm,
there. And if you're an in-person coach, well, okay, providing the motivation, the arousal, the cueing to get your client to where they need to be. So it's a bit more than just giving that simple instruction, right?
yeah. I was reminded of a moment in Bangkok. BK was on pendulum squat, and I think he did 2 rest pause sets after a straight set,
Yeah,
and he had Ben, the uh, individual who organized the camp. And
yeah,
this is while Brandon was on his, I think it was 10 to 15 seconds he took between
okay.
the rest pause sets. And you had Ben screaming in his ear, "This is why you're great. This is why you have this greatness. This is why you're the best." And the way it
Love that.
flowed off his tongue, it was like he was speaking from a book, and
Yeah,
someone
yeah,
had sat down for 15 minutes to think about the
yeah,
way you'd put these words together. And like, just the energy and the amount of
yeah, yeah.
arousal I know that was being ensued was ridiculous. And I've
Should
had
have
an
recorded
experience
it.
like that. I know there was a photo. There was a photo. It's
Okay.
on BK's
Yeah,
social.
yeah,
But I remember in my first year of sports science, the lecturer, we're doing a prac in the gym. He asked does anyone want to go for a 1RM on a bench press?
Okay.
And no one else put their hand up, so I was like, well, stuff it. Let me give this a crack. So
Yeah.
I went for a 1RM, and the encouragement was null. There was no encouragement for anyone, but just the fact you had 30 people watching you
Yes.
created this sense of
Yes.
urgency, and I could definitely feel a heart rate was higher. There was maybe a little bit more like adrenaline going on potentially, but it makes a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so training
Mm-hmm.
partners, especially if maybe you're not quite there with that skill, could make a big
Yeah, I
difference too.
agree. I think training partners are invaluable. Whether that's like being coached by someone, I mean, they're virtually your training partner, or yeah, finding someone to do sessions with. Even if they're not yelling, they don't have to yell at you every rep all the time. Like just having someone there, like you said, literally someone watching, someone being there, maybe guiding you through the set, giving you that motivation when you need. Even that's going to allow you to raise your standard. And
Mm.
when it's a recommendation that I give. I mean, some people can't. They're training at 5 a.m. It's like, where are you going to find a training partner who wants to come out at 5 a.m.? But it's definitely a recommendation that I like to give now and then for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we could speak about this with regards to training volume, but I want to switch over
Hmm.
to protein intakes.
Okay.
Um, so just like training, there's like a set of recommendations to potentially
Yeah.
find a starting point for.
Yeah.
With regards to protein intake, do you think there's a large range for people's response to different protein intakes and potentially, using different intakes for different
Hmm.
phases? And
Hmm.
would you
Hmm.
go about it from a performance perspective? Maybe you
Hmm.
go, okay, we start on this protein intake. Performance is going pretty well. Would you consider saying, hey, to the athlete, let's give a slightly lower protein intake approach? We're
Hmm.
still within
Hmm.
the recommended range, but we're going to have more
Yeah.
carbohydrates available.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. I think protein intake is an area that over the years we've definitely learned more about. But there are still gaps in the research, at least when it comes to specific context dependent
Mm,
scenarios, right? So, um, if you think about kind of what bodybuilders have been doing for the longest time possible, they've just been stuffing their face with protein, right? And 2, 3 to 4 grams times body weight is something that you'll often see, right? Bodybuilders do. I remember both the preps that I did when I was 20 and 21. I was eating like 200 to 220 grams of protein, which doesn't sound like much. And I only recently kind of wrapped my head around this when I was doing research in the area last year. But at the time, I was only like 60 to 70 kilos. I was like 65 kilo, like at my comp weight was 65 kilos, and I was eating that much
yeah.
protein. So that's like nearly 4 times body weight, right? 3 to 4 times body weight. So yeah, I was doing research last year looking at the impact of protein intake on muscle retention or lean mass retention in a deficit, and I realized that okay, this is an area that would be cool to see more research in. We have a bit of research we can kind of use to put something together, and it seemed to show that more protein does seem to be more beneficial for lean mass retention in an energy deficit, which makes sense, which does layer on top of our like foundational understanding of how like an energy deficit may impact muscle protein synthesis and other like physiological pathways that influence muscle retention. And that doesn't mean that more protein is better like linearly,
Mm,
to infinity and beyond. It's like there's always diminishing returns. Our human physiology um, it involves diminishing returns on so many different levels. And, we want a protein intake that, as athletes, as bodybuilders, we want a protein intake that isn't just the recommended daily intake, because the recommended daily intake is just going to cover off few of the key, bases that we need to be healthy. We want an intake that's going to maximize growth, or at least allow us to get more growth out of the training stimulus we're inducing. And we want to make sure that that intake isn't hampering our ability to consume other macronutrients and isn't hampering our just physiological health, because there's an idea out there that eating protein can impact like your renal health, for example, which doesn't seem to be the case, even at protein intakes of like 4 grams times body weight. So that's why, we need to ask these questions, right? It's because we want to be somewhere in the middle there. If we have too much protein, well, that might impact your ability to consume carbohydrate, which is an issue. And I don't view protein as a macronutrient that will facilitate performance. So I will rarely change someone's protein intake based on what phase they're in. The key phase that I will change someone's protein intake is usually going from like a build to a long-term contest prep, because I know they're going to get really lean, fat loss phase, whatever. I'll usually increase protein intake. Recently, I've become a fan of just whatever protein intake I think that they're gonna be on in their prep, or that I want them on in their prep. So I'll just tell them to start on it now, even in their building phase. Say, hey, just this is what we're gonna do, a bit higher, but that's because I want you higher down the track. I want you to start on it now, and I don't care as much about calorie. Like, yes, eating more protein is going to bring your calories up now. You're in a build. I don't care too much about calories coming from protein. That is right. So that's a strategy that I've been using as of late.
Martin,
I think,
have you been calculating that from stage weight or just body weight at that point in time?
I use like the average, like I use like the median of whatever weight they're going to be in their comp prep. So if they start at 80 and I think they're going to finish at 70, I'll get calculate based on like 75.
Okay.
So that's just the way I do it. But again, like this, as coaches, you have to come up with your own way of making decisions about these things. You're not going to find these decisions in a textbook. You're not going to find these frameworks. Some you will, some you won't. So I think a general range for people looking to build muscle, I think like 2 grams should be something that times body weight. 2 grams times body weight is something that we should be able to aim for. I think it's realistic. I think you're going to be sure that you're 100% sure that you're covering all bases, and it's not going to really hamper your consumption of other macronutrients.
Yeah.
Like, yes, maybe in like 5 years' time, all this cool research will come out that will say doesn't actually matter if you have 1.5 times body weight. It's actually fine. Going up to 2 doesn't give you anything. It doesn't make it worse off. It just doesn't make things any better. I'd still be okay with giving my clients. I'd be okay with the fact that I've been giving my clients 2 times their body weight for the past 5 years. Like, it's okay, because there does seem to be some research that shows like even lower intakes can be beneficial for like muscle retention and muscle growth. But again, we're thinking, well, what can we do to maximize this scenario? So I would just err on the side of around 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. I think it's a simple one to follow, and possibly even higher in an energy deficit. At least when the goal is to get lean, because there might be an interaction there between body fat levels and protein intake and muscle retention, right? That interaction might exist. That is to say that the leaner you get, the more important protein intake becomes.
Do you think that, I mean, you mentioned a couple of reasons why it becomes more important to have a higher protein intake in a contest prep. I know one of them is, there's a down regulation of nutrient partitioning. And you mentioned something about MPS. Could you go into a bit more detail about that if you have a good understanding of it?
Yeah. The thing is, when you get lean, and the reason I conducted the meta-analysis last year on the impact of protein on muscle retention is because there are some reasons to possibly be concerned about muscle retention when you are in an energy deficit that is causing you to get down to low body fat levels. A decrease in muscle protein synthesis is the easiest one. That's the first one. So even a moderate energy deficit can reduce muscle protein synthesis like up to like 20%. We know there's also hormonal downregulation as you get leaner. So
Mm.
important hormones that can impact muscle protein synthesis and that can just impact the growth response in general. Will plummet in contest prep. Um, Energy availability in and of itself. So the fact that our ability to kind of distribute energy across the body and towards vital organs and vital functions starts to diminish, that means that our body is becoming more conservative with energy, and it has to be a little strategic with what it actually spends energy on. So it might spend less energy on anabolic processes, right? And again, the leaner you get, the more prominent this effect might become. Insulin sensitivity, nutrient partitioning. There's a whole host of other things that happen as you get leaner that again make us concerned about muscle retention, and that's why training has to be dialed in, and that's why we worry about protein intake in a contest prep. So yeah, there are physiological reasons to think that more protein may help in a long-term energy deficit. Some of the research I've conducted does point towards that as well. But again, we just have to, as practitioners, it's like, okay, that's our physiological understanding. That's our research-based understanding of how things work. But like you said before, where does that science then uh, cross, right, with the art of coaching? We need to, they do cross paths. We have to think about what's worked well for us, what's worked well with our clients in the past. What am I comfortable prescribing my clients, right? What am I comfortable with them doing, and what are they comfortable with doing as well? Because some people might not be comfortable doing things that you tell them to do, like eating a whole bunch of protein. So that's where the science really does cross paths with the art of coaching.
Martin, thank you very much for your time today. I greatly appreciate you sitting down with a young chap like me and imparting some knowledge, and hopefully,
Yeah.
I think last episode we got 2.5 listeners, so this one I'm striving for 3. So hopefully we can wrap up a few
Love that.
extra
Yeah,
people
let's
on
push for
board.
3. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, always looking to be better than the last time, right?
Yeah, that's
Progression.
it. Progressive overload, yeah.
Yeah. Maybe next week we'll have a stall, but who knows?
Yeah.
Well, mate,
Yeah.
if you've got training, I hope you have a good session.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
I'll
have an
head to the
awesome
gym
rest
in
of
a
your day.
second, actually. Yep, awesome. Thanks so much for having me on, mate. I look forward to seeing how your podcast goes, and maybe I'll be on again in the future.
Thanks, man. I hope you will be, and I'll probably see you around at some of the shows.
No worries. Thank you.
See you, man.